So Chantal mentioned I talk about playing big. And I talk about it because several years ago, I started a coaching practice. I was on my own journey from playing small in a career path that wasn't what I really wanted to do, to trying to figure out what playing big looked like for me. And I knew it had something to do with working with women and working in this world of personal growth that I had really been immersed in since I was about 10 years old, quite honestly. And I wasn't one of those entrepreneurs that knew at the outset who her market was, what she was going to be offering. Some of you have probably gotten that advice if you're entrepreneurs, right? Figure it all out. I was not someone who could do that. So I sort of hung out my shingle and wanted to see what women showed up and what they were grappling with. And what I found out was that every woman that showed up in my office was brilliant. Every woman that showed up had some amazingly potent gifts. One of my first clients was a woman who wasn't really known as a star within her organization, worked in a large nonprofit, mid-level program manager, thought of as a good contributor by her colleagues, but nothing more. And sitting in the office with her, I found out she was an avid reader. She was reading every journal in her field. She was on top of all the latest thinking for the industry. She had some ideas about how her organization needed to change to be ready for what was coming. And yet no one in her organization knew any of that. Her brilliance wasn't getting out. And it wasn't getting out because there was some gap in how she saw herself or what she thought she was capable of and ready for. And then one of my next clients was a woman who worked in a large corporation where she was known as a star. She had a fabulous reputation and she kind of knew it, but she didn't like her job. And there was another role at the organization that she wanted to play. It was a role that didn't exist yet, but she thought the organization needed it and she thought she would love it. And yet she didn't think there was any way she could get that role created for her or that she would be put in it. She just didn't see herself as the kind of person a job would be created for. So again and again, I was having this experience of sitting before women, falling in love. I was falling in love with their gifts and their brilliance and their capability, and seeing that not making its way into the world. And then I looked around at my dearest friends, and I felt the same way about them. And then I looked at what was happening with me, and I knew that despite having had a great education, despite having had supportive people in my life and getting a lot of positive feedback for my work along the way, I wasn't really believing in my ideas. And I wasn't really believing that I could have the kind of career that I wanted. So I looked around at all of us and saw how we were all playing small, and got very interested in what could help us make this journey to playing big. And by playing big, I didn't mean playing big on the world's terms or the old school definition of playing big. It didn't mean more money or a bigger salary or more notoriety or fame. I meant that kind of playing big that we each know inside what it means for us. Right? When we're really honest with ourselves, we know what playing big would look like for us. We know the calling that we're not really listening to. We know the dream that keeps tugging at us that we rationalize away. We know how we're copping out. So I started to work with women around making that journey from playing small to playing big. And I found something really fascinating, that no matter what a woman's background or her age or her industry was, there were these core tools and ideas that helped us make that journey. And I want to talk about one of them in particular today. Unhooking from praise and criticism. So how many of you, when you hear that phrase, there's like a, ooh, that sounds like something I should hear more about? Yeah. So I often find with women that I don't know exactly what that means, but I know I definitely need that. And that was sort of my reaction to when those words popped to mind. Unhooking, why that phrase, that word that we don't use too much, unhooking? Because we're hooked, because we get hooked. When you think about what a hook is, it's something that catches onto something else, that then holds it, or ensnares it in some way, or restricts its motion. So if we think about our playing big as a kind of big and bold and free motion, the hook is anything that then catches us and keeps us from being in that big and bold and free motion. And praise and criticism is one of the things that has hooked me so much in my own journey, and that I see hooking and stopping so many of us. There are a number of different ways we get hooked. It doesn't show up the same for all of us. So one is that we're afraid of criticism that might come our way if we really do our thing. So maybe you've got an idea for an innovation in your company or your field, but you know it's going to be controversial. Or maybe you have a piece of art you want to put out into the world that you think is probably going to get some not great responses, or might get some not great responses. So just do a little check-in with yourself and raise your hand if you think this is one way that praise and criticism might be restricting you, that there's something you'd like to do, but there's fear of potential criticism. Yeah, a lot of hands around the room. Interestingly, a lot of women have a different form of getting hooked, which is that we're avoiding praise. So maybe we grew up in a home where we were told when we were shining too bright, what, do you think you're better than everyone else? Or maybe getting praise got tied up in our minds with being arrogant or thinking we're better than others. Some cultures have this tall poppy idea. You don't want to be the tall poppy, right? Standing out from the rest, even for positive reasons. So checking in with yourself, is there anything you're not doing because you actually feel uncomfortable when you're getting lots of praise? Yeah. Then we've got our criticism post-traumatic syndrome. So most of us, somewhere along the way, in this harsh, insensitive, fallible world that we're living in, have had experiences of being criticized in ways that shredded us, that really hurt. And when we have had those, the wound can sometimes stay open, and then we become sure we are not going to do anything that might put us at risk of that experience again. So for how many is that playing out? And yeah. And then lastly, and this was the biggest one for me, getting hooked because we're dependent on or addicted to praise. So I'm a recovering good student, high achiever type. I grew up getting a lot of gold stars, so much so that I started to feel like I was failing anytime I did something that didn't get a bunch of gold stars. And then that quickly turned into shaping my actions and my career choices towards those things that were going to bring gold stars. That's just as limiting too. So when I talk to women about the fears, and we just heard about how women are not sharing their voices because of fear. So fear of what? For a lot of us, the biggest fears are around what other people will think and say. People won't get it. My family won't approve. I will be criticized in ways that really hurt. Another way I like to think about playing big is painting with the full spectrum of colors available to us. That we can use any of the colors we need to say what we have to say, to do our work in the world. But if we know that this set of colors is likely to bring criticism, and this set of colors touches on that thing that I got criticized for in the past, and this set of colors is what's most likely to bring praise, so I gotta go over there, my palette has just become very small. And it's gonna be really hard for me to be true to my voice when my palette is so small. So, why do we as women get hooked? Why is this something we should be talking about at a women's conference? Because isn't praise and criticism an issue for everybody? Well, it is, right? Because we've all got egos and we're all human. And so criticism hurts for all of us, and praise gives our egos that little boost for all of us. But there's some ways that women have had a unique relationship to what other people think that I believe we need to talk about and understand and carry with us so that we can understand what our work as women is at this moment around praise and criticism. When I first taught about this topic in my leadership programs for women, I noticed something really surprising. And that was this. When we started talking about why we were so afraid of criticism or what criticism we were afraid of, I was listening to the women share their experiences and fears. And they sounded so afraid of potential criticisms. And their voices were trembling. And I was listening, with my heart and my body and my intuition, and what kept coming to my mind was, they sound like their lives are at stake. They actually sound like they feel afraid that their lives are threatened. And it felt like the fear went so much deeper than when we talked about any other topic in the course. And so I went away on my own and I thought about that. And on my walks and my downtime for a few weeks, I was thinking, why would that be? And then I started to get, oh, of course criticism feels life-threatening for us. Because for thousands of years, it was. We're coming out of a time when we as women couldn't protect ourselves through physical means. We weren't as strong as those we probably needed to protect ourselves against. We couldn't protect ourselves through legal means. We couldn't own property, so we didn't have $1 to our name to escape a dangerous situation with. One of our best available survival skills was to do what would be approved of and praised by the stronger, more powerful others in our midst. So when we talk about unhooking from praise and criticism, we're talking about doing monumental work that belongs to women in this historical moment uniquely. And we're doing a very deep and strange kind of retraining of our consciousness to say, it's true, honey, it really wasn't okay before, and it is okay now to speak what you need to speak and to do what you need to do. Another piece that informs our relationship to praise and criticism is what I call the noisy room. You know, I feel like all my life I've been walking into very noisy rooms. And what I mean by that is rooms full of information and input and stimuli about the moods of everybody else in the room. Their preferences, their dynamics, who's having a rough day, who seems a little resentful of what's going on. I'm getting all that information. And it's interesting because there's actually very little scientific research that consistently shows any kind of gender differences between men and women. There's a lot of isolated studies, but when you really look for where do we see differences that span different class factors, international, and look for something consistent to gender, there's very little that shows up as fundamental gender differences. But one of the things that does consistently show up is that women are much better at reading facial expressions and body language than our male counterparts. We might have heard that before, but what I don't think we've talked about enough is what that means, which is that we're constantly getting extra information about what other people think about us. We're actually getting more information about praise and criticism, how people are receiving us, than our male counterparts are. And so we have to find a way to manage that and filter it and let go of it when we need to focus on what we're there to do, what we're there to say. You with me on the noisy room? Feel like you've been walking into noisy rooms all your life? It's kind of exhausting sometimes, right? Some other factors that inform our relationship to praise and criticism: the stories we absorb. You know, I have a fabulous partner, husband in my life, and I'm much more fond of stereotypical romantic comedy movies than he is, and sometimes I drag him to them. And not too long ago, we were coming home from one, and I thought it was, you know, fairly decent for its genre. And he said, "Tara, I just don't understand. Why don't the women in these films do anything? Like, they're just like responding to whatever the guy decides to do." And I thought back on this, you know, standard plot of the movie, and he was right. It was true. And I am so conditioned in it that I hadn't really seen it. I hadn't noticed it. He noticed it. When you think about the overwhelming message we get from film, television, still in many ways from books, through our entire girlhood and then in our adulthood, it's that how a woman is perceived from the outside will determine her destiny. How she's perceived physically, but also just how she's perceived. Because when you watch a million stories that were written and directed by men and with a male protagonist, the woman is the object of the gaze from someone else's perspective. And so we strangely learn to see women's life stories as determined by how they're perceived by others. And I think that makes us then get hung up on praise and criticism in a whole new way. And then on top of that, we've got our good girl socialization, put relationships first, be a people pleaser. And we've also got the fact that we as women are going to get more personal criticism than men and more inappropriate criticism. There was just a study done, I don't know if any of you saw the recent study in fortune.com. I love this because a woman just took research into her own hands. She's trained as a linguist and had worked as a tech entrepreneur, but she's not an academic. But she knew this study needed to be done, and she had the PhD and did it. And she analyzed performance reviews from women and men in tech companies. And she found that not only did women get more critical negative reviews in general than men, but that their reviews included some kind of personal and personality criticism, whereas men's didn't. So they were being told, "You're abrasive, watch your tone, you're too aggressive, you seem judgmental." 75% of the negative feedback that women got included a personality criticism. 2% of the negative feedback that men got included a personality criticism. So we've got to be prepared, if we're going to be out there in the world playing big, sharing our voices, doing our thing, to not just get criticism on our work, but to get criticism on ourselves. And then, of course, that criticism often becomes vulgar, sexualized, and violent. So let's talk about how we unhook. How can we change the tide here and not get hooked by praise and criticism, because it's so critical for what we as women need to do in this moment. The first concept I want to introduce you to has been radical and life-changing for me, and it is this, that feedback can only give you information about the person giving the feedback. It can never give you any information about yourself. Now, my book editor from Penguin is here today, sitting somewhere in the audience, and when I wrote this in the book, she made an edit and said, "Are you sure this is what you mean, Tara? Don't you mean feedback doesn't only tell you about yourself, it also tells you about the person giving the feedback?" But no, that's really not what I mean. I mean something more radical than that. I really believe that feedback can never tell you anything about you. It can only tell you about the person giving the feedback. So let's see, how many entrepreneurs do we have in the room? Okay, so you're an entrepreneur, you're pitching a potential client for a project you want to do with them in your business, and they don't go for it. And then you pitch 4 other clients the same project and nobody goes for it. Does that tell you anything about you as an entrepreneur? Does that tell you anything about the project and how good it is? I would argue no. It tells you about those clients and what kind of pitch is going to work for them. And if the 5 clients love your pitch, unfortunately, same thing. That doesn't tell you anything about you either, right? It tells you about what those clients are looking for. And how many in here have some kind of artistic or creative passion? Yeah, so you show your artwork to 5 galleries and they don't go for it, tells you about what those gallery owners are looking for. Show it to 1 million galleries and they don't go for it, tells you what contemporary galleries are looking for. I would say it can't tell you anything about you as an artist. So when we get this, feedback becomes neutral information that helps us influence and reach those we want to influence and reach. We're unhooked. We can use it when it comes from people who we need to pay attention to, and we don't have to go on the emotional roller coaster with it. The second principle is that all substantive work brings praise and criticism. And this sounds so simple, but I know for me it was actually a huge aha, because again, recovering good student type, so I thought good work, you get the good grade. One teacher, one authority figure is going to give you the gold star or not. Turns out, when we're playing big in our lives, of course, in our adult careers, all substantive work brings a range of reactions, criticism, and praise. I just wrote my first piece for the New York Times. It came out about 2 weeks ago. And it was an op-ed essay, and it was about unhooking from praise and criticism. So you can imagine the big joke that God was playing on me while I was grappling with my fears of how everyone would react to my piece about unhooking from praise and criticism. So I managed to keep writing day by day, even though my inner critic was saying, only grown-ups can write for the New York Times, and you're not really grown up in that grown-up way. And people who write for the New York Times, their writing sounds flowy and articulate and experienced in a way yours doesn't. I kept writing, and I knew, of course, thank God I knew, because I've spent years now trying to internalize this idea, that the best reaction I was going to get was going to include both praise and criticism, that there was nothing I could do to avoid that, and that that was going to be okay. And what did make me feel like a grown-up was when the piece went out and it got just that. It got its praise and it got its criticism. And it got lots of traction and lots of people finding meaning in it, and it got many articles written about what was wrong with it and what was wrong with my approach. And what was so powerful for me was that it felt like I just got to let other people have their space to be at the table. And that included criticizing the article. That my job wasn't to anticipate their arguments, that actually would have been taking away from them their opportunity to come to the table. And that my job was to share my truth, my piece, and their job was to share theirs. And there really was room for all of us, even when criticism was included. I love to tell women, go to Amazon or barnesandnoble.com or another site of your choice with book reviews, and look at the reviews of one of your favorite authors and read the most positive reviews and read the most negative reviews back to back. And just toggle back and forth until your brain gets it. That all substantive work, especially when done by women, is going to bring praise and criticism. And lastly, the last tool I want to talk about for how we unhook is that we look inward. I think for all of us, there's types of criticism that sting like hell, where we remember the words said for years. And then there's kinds that bounce right off of us, right? We've all had that experience. So what's the difference? What I've found is that the criticism that goes in like an arrow and the arrow plants and we can't get it out is the criticism that mirrors what we already believe about ourselves. That's why it sticks. I think of it as finding the matchup inside between some way that we think the world reacted to us and what we're holding inside. And what's so fabulous here is that then the most painful criticism can become a gift because it shows us where we need to look inside and where we need a little healing inside. So I know that when something happens in the world that makes me feel unattractive or ashamed of my body, it's time to look inside and say, Tara, what are you still holding about this body? What work do I need to do? And when something happens that makes me feel like I'm not a good writer, these are usually the two that stick for me, writing and body, then it's time to look inside. What am I holding? What beliefs am I holding? What harsh narratives am I holding about myself and my creative work in the world? It's all about then doing the inner work to change what's in here so that criticism doesn't have the same kind of landing pad. So why does this matter so much? Why does this matter so much? I think it matters so much because the work we have to do in this moment is not work that's going to be universally loved. When we think about the systems that need to change, the power structures that need to change, the status quo that needs to be shaken up, in your own community, in your own family, in your company, in the world, you know that praise and criticism are going to come your way. And what I so want for our world is for that to not hold you back from doing what you know needs to be done. So let's all unhook and become more free together. Thanks.